Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here with us tonight. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Lisa Levitan, and I've been a teacher here in Ottawa for almost 20 years, and I'm Jewish. I'm somebody who has always loved my job. If I get out of the school before the custodians make me leave at 11 p.m., that's a pretty good day. I've always known that I've wanted to be a teacher, and I absolutely love what I do. And it was, in fact, my grade one teacher at the Ottawa Carleton District School Board who gave me this zest and love for teaching at 6 years old. So I count myself very lucky to have a job that I love, and seeing all those smiling and exciting little munchkin faces running towards me every morning is definitely my whole heart. It's my passion. It's why I do what I do. And I don't take advantage of the fact of how lucky I am to actually get paid for something that I enjoy so much. It's just wonderful. That being said, what I've witnessed and experienced in my school board and in Ottawa and our community in general since May of 2021 has been like nothing I've ever seen. I've spoken up against hate my whole life, always standing up for anyone who's discriminated against in any way, shape, or form. But this time it's different. And the big difference is because this time no one's listening and very few are helping. And that makes it extremely personal. Jewish teachers aren't speaking up much because, as employees, we're made to feel scared by both our employer and our union. We're told to keep quiet, or else we could be faced with insubordination and be subject to investigations, which could lead to us being fired. And yes, while I know I'm risking a lot by continuing to speak up for Jewish safety, just as I would for any marginalized group having the right to feel and be safe in their school setting, I'm genuinely hopeful that my employer can revert back to being the inclusive, zero hate tolerance workplace that I used to work at not so long ago. I hope that senior staff and trustees understand that this isn't me or anyone going against the school board. I've spoken to numerous senior staff and trustees for over a year now. So, of the students, the parents, and the community, this is about me wholeheartedly trying to help my employer do better, because whether I'm there or not, they need help desperately. And I have to believe and have faith that my employer would want all students and staff to come together through inclusivity and care, because that is what the OCDSB has taught me for almost 4 decades. So I sincerely hope that they take our genuine offering of help. And even if that means me leaving the classroom and becoming a needed Jewish equity coach in this school board, I would be more than willing to do that. For a repeatedly traumatized Jewish child to be told by numerous professional leaders in the field of education, whose primary responsibility is to keep students safe, please be patient, I'm on my learning journey, is unacceptable. This has now become a choice. It's a choice to allow this hateful, inaccurate, ignorant, segregated bullying to continue in Ottawa. Your lack of understanding of my history is not a valid argument. And now, with fewer Holocaust survivors than ever before, we are the next generation, and we must speak up to ensure that everyone is safe. But we can't do this alone. The Jewish community is much too small, especially in here in Ottawa. The silence from the non-Jewish population has been deafening. It's time for non-Jewish leaders and anti-hate advocates to come forward and insist on this change immediately, right now. If this was happening to any other marginalized group, there would be massive protests and rallies worldwide. We as Jews would be attending these protests and rallies, standing alongside them against any discrimination or hate, because that's what we do. We would be there. We are always there for people who are in need of help, for everyone else. And now I'm saying, what about us? What about us right now? Where is everyone? We've had members of parliament who have attended Rise Up, and they were so shocked and distraught by what they heard that even Anita Vandenbeld mentioned it at the House of Commons. This is so appreciated, but now what? We had leaders of almost every Canadian Jewish organization attend Rise Up or receive copies of the student and parent testimonies. Now what? What actions is anyone taking to help us out? The increase of anti-Semitism has made me personally want to delve deeper into my Jewish identity. I've made it my top priority for the past year and a half to learn, understand, protect, and speak out against lies perpetuated by uneducated, ignorant, half-watched documentaries or social media posts claiming to be factual. But this isn't about me. And honestly, it's not only about the Jewish children either. It's about what it will be like in 5 to 10 years when all of these kids, Jewish or non-Jewish alike, grow up, run our cities, our countries, and our world, all while having learned in school that Jews are the enemy. What will we do and where are we going to go then? We must insist that never again remains a call to action to be vigilant against all forms of hate, ensuring that it's not just a phrase, but a principled cause. So with that, I would like to introduce our first speaker. And I'm privileged and honored to have our good friend Arthur here with us today. Arthur was the former head of Canada's delegation to the IRA, Definition of Anti-Semitism, and he's also a retired former executive champion of the Jewish Public Servants Network, among many other things. So please welcome Arthur.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here this evening and share some perspectives about our community's struggle against anti-Semitism, and specifically to speak to the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance's definition of anti-Semitism. Before I get into any details, there are a few things that I just wanted to say. First, I'd like to acknowledge that while I am joining you virtually, I am physically located on the traditional and unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. They have been here on this land since time immemorial and have a key role to play as stewards of this territory. Second, I would like to acknowledge all the work that you, Lisa, have done to raise awareness and to galvanize the Jewish community in Ottawa to confront anti-Semitism. This is a big challenge, and you must be recognized for bringing your passion and your determination in helping our community to address hate and discrimination. There's work for us to do. And as Lisa pointed out in her introductions, during my time in public service, I did serve as Canada's head of delegation to the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. And I was also the first executive champion of the Federal Jewish Public Servants Network. What my time in both of those capacities showed me is how essential it is for the community to work together to combat anti-Semitism. It showed me how key it is to build partnerships and be effective allies for others in their struggle against hate. Now that I'm retired, I joined the board of directors for the Center of Holocaust Education and Scholarship here in Ottawa. For me, as the child of Holocaust survivors and someone who was kicked out of my country of birth because I'm a Jew, it was essential for me to work with an organization like CHESS. For me, it has always been about developing effective tools to address a problem. We need tools to address anti-Semitism and all forms of discrimination. It was in that spirit that the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance adopted a definition of anti-Semitism at its plenary in Bucharest in May of 2016. Unfortunately, there's much misinformation and ignorance about IRA, its work, and about the definition that it adopted. So first, what is IRA? IRA is an interesting international organization. It brings together representatives of over 30 countries, including Canada, Switzerland, Argentina, Israel, and the United States. Countries join this international organization because they are committed to Holocaust remembrance and education. They join because they're determined to fight anti-Semitism, anti-Roma discrimination, and foster a more inclusive world. Delegations are headed by ambassadors or senior officials and include experts, historians, archivists, educators, and community organizations. Its work is done by consensus and is supported by professionals based at its headquarters in Berlin. It is an international organization, not a Jewish organization. Today, there are 35 member countries and 10 observer countries. IRA's origins stem from the Stockholm Declaration in 2000, 22 years ago, where numerous countries came together in common cause and to work in partnership to better remember the history of the Holocaust. They pledged to work together to commemorate victims and to reaffirm humanity's common aspirations for mutual understanding and for justice. IRA supports these efforts through grants, through research, and through political statements and advocacy on key questions. One of the organs of IRA is its Committee on Anti-Semitism and Holocaust Denial. That committee is made up of international experts from a variety of fields who work together to address issues related to anti-Semitism. It was this committee that brought forward a proposal for a definition of anti-Semitism to the plenary of IRA in Bucharest in 2016. However, the origins of the work that animated conversations at the committee dated back many years before that. In 2004, the European Monitoring Center on Racism and Xenophobia conducted its first study on anti-Semitism in the European Union. At the time, data was limited, and there was no coherent definition of anti-Semitism to guide their work or that of various governmental institutions that were mandated to combat anti-Semitism and promote justice in the European Union. Members of the American Jewish Committee and other experts worked with the EU Center and drafted a comprehensive definition, one that included clear examples of the forms it could take. Some of those examples included things such as Holocaust denial and new forms of anti-Semitism related to Israel that were based on the lived experience of European Jews. The successor agency to the European Monitoring Center, however, refused to adopt any definitions of discrimination, including the one on anti-Semitism, because they felt it was important for communities to speak about their own experiences with discrimination and felt that adopting any one definition of any form preempted the complexity and the importance of having these conversations. Efforts to have a formal definition on anti-Semitism adopted by the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, or the OSCE, another big multilateral organization in the European space, were being blocked at that time by the Russian Federation. That is when the Anti-Semitism Committee decided to advance the conversation within IRA and brought it forward to the IRA plenary. For those who don't know, IRA members were largely a subset of states, many from the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe region. Sorry for some of the diplomatic jargon, but it's important to understand the political machinations that were going on in terms of why and how the definition was adopted. I remember the discussion and the careful consideration that went into the definition and its illustrative set of examples. The non-legally binding definition states, and it's very clear, anti-Semitism is a certain perception of Jews which may be expressed as hatred toward Jews. Rhetorical and physical manifestations of anti-Semitism are directed toward Jewish or non-Jewish individuals and or their property, toward Jewish community institutions and religious facilities. That is the core of the definition. In the text that was adopted, this language appears in a text box and is set apart from other elements that were discussed. IRA also endorsed an illustrated list of examples that may guide its work. Discussion about this illustrative list was heated and controversial. Several states asked for the removal of this list altogether. Critics have claimed that some of the 11 examples impede their ability to criticize Israel. They claim they are an affront to solidarity with the Palestinian people. Avoiding that specific pitfall was definitely on the minds of all the delegates to the IRA when this issue was discussed. The list of examples includes a preamble that states that criticism of Israel, just like criticism of any other state, is not anti-Semitic. The examples implore those who use them to apply context and nuance to distinguish between criticism of Israel and anti-Semitic speech and acts. Clearly, not every criticism of Israel is anti-Semitic. Neither are statements and actions in support or that call for Palestinian human rights or support their aspiration to an independent Palestine. Those exhortations are in no way covered by the definition. What people need to understand, however, is that extreme anti-Israel rhetoric has already had deadly consequence for Jewish communities around the world. It has contributed to attacks in Paris, Buenos Aires, Brussels, and Copenhagen. It has led to vandalism against synagogues in Montreal, community centers in Toronto, and Jewish cemeteries worldwide. All of this has left the Jewish community terrorized and wondering how to respond. Comparing supporters of Israel to Nazis has consequences. Accusing Jews of dual loyalty to Israel has consequences. Holding Jews around the world accountable for the actions of the government of the state of Israel has consequences. Using these illustrative examples of anti-Semitism in no way impedes anyone from holding the government of Israel accountable for its actions. They do not impede free speech. These examples in no way negatively affect the legitimate aspirations of the Palestinian people. IHRA's critics have leveled an unprecedented attack against a people's ability to define their own experiences with discrimination. Most of these critics have invoked Palestinian solidarity as their motivation. Expressions of concern about anti-Semitism have usually come as a second thought. But people need to realize that there's a specificity to anti-Semitism. There's a lived experience of over 2,000 years of expulsions, pogroms, blood libels, and the Holocaust. The IHRA definition of anti-Semitism is the product of discussion and negotiation. It is measured and nuanced. It has been endorsed by dozens of countries, institutions, and global actors. It has been endorsed by universities, businesses, and sports franchises, not as a means of silencing or limiting criticism of Israel, but as a guide to help all of us fight against the millennia-old hatred that continues to plague Jews around the world. But let me be clear, endorsement or adoption of IHRA or the IHRA definition is not the end goal. I'm less concerned with an institution adopting the specific definition than I am in that institution working with our community to address real-life experiences with anti-Semitism. The federal government adopted the IHRA definition, yet it still funded the anti-Semitic activities of Leif Maroof. It did nothing while the Canada School of Public Service canceled a session by Erwin Kotler, Canada's special envoy on Holocaust remembrance and countering anti-Semitism, because it felt that his presentation would be, quote, too political. It isn't adoption that it's important, it's the use of the definition. From my perspective, too many in our community are focused on the political adoption of the definition by various institutions and governments. The focus should be on developing tools, educational programs, and partnerships that recognize the specificity of anti-Semitism and then use appropriate educational and pedagogical tools to address it. The fact that the IHRA definition has been the subject of so much antagonism and misinformation has had the effect of politicizing it. Politicizing efforts to combat anti-Semitism are unhelpful. Too many believe that adoption of the IHRA definition is the standard by which either an individual or an organization's commitment to the equality, safety, and belonging for Jews should be measured. The insistence on that political action has, in my view, negatively affected our ability to practically and tangibly address the problem. I'm a huge proponent of IHRA. I was there when it was adopted. The definition exists. It is supported. It does not make sense to me to expend more energy to keep fighting to adopt something that has already been adopted globally, nationally, and provincially. It is, in my view, an ineffective strategy. I am a bigger fan of effective educational tools and partnerships to combat discrimination. I hope our community focuses on these efforts to work with educators in our community to ensure those tools are used to address our lived experiences with anti-Semitism. In my view, these are the next steps that we need. I'm more than happy to answer any questions that colleagues may have. Thanks.
So thank you. And as Lisa explained at the beginning, if you do have a question, because there are quite a few of us, and thank you everybody for joining, in order of what that shows up on my screen and no other reason, January Cohen, if you could please unmute and put yourself on screen and ready to ask your question.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Arthur, for that presentation. So I find your point at the end about IHRA interesting. Do you think that it would be a useful tactic at the school board level, perhaps, to, instead of saying, please adopt the IRA definition, to simply say, look, we live in Canada, we live in Ontario, IRA is accepted here. So what you're doing contradicts IRA in these ways, and just sort of take it almost like a fait accompli.
So thanks for the question, January. I really appreciate it. I think, look, from my perspective, I think it's really important for the Ottawa Carleton District School Board and other school boards in Ottawa and across the province and across the country to talk to us, to talk to our community, to understand what our kids are going through, what teachers are going through, and use very specific examples to help them understand why they need to have effective tools at their disposition and programs in place to counter that discrimination. I think that going to institutions like the school board and say, hey, I want you to adopt something, will result in a political fight that at the end of the day, even if we're successful, I think will negatively affect our ability to then use those tools effectively across the board. I rather institutions like CEJA or CHESS or Federation or whomever there is to develop effective tools for us to be able to then engage with students, with teachers, with administrators, to share with them the experiences that we have and to give them the tools to have complex conversations that really address the experiences of our people. So that was where I would put the emphasis.
Thank you. Next up, David Reutenberg, please unmute and go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much. Arthur, that was really great. It was great to hear the depth of the history and gain further insight into how the definition came to be. I take your point. We talked privately about this, that adopting IRA by itself doesn't really get us very far, but I am troubled because of this attack, which you referenced so eloquently in the remarks that you just made. It seems to me that whether it's adopted or not, people are being, I guess, trained such that if somebody comes forward and uses the examples from IRA, even if they aren't asked to adopt IRA, they're going to say, wait a minute, that's IRA. You're promoting anti-Palestinian racism. I can't talk to you anymore. And so I guess what I want to know is how we can effectively neutralize that effect, because I do think, as you said yourself, that our ability to speak for ourselves is being undermined, including by some fairly prominent members of the Jewish community who claim at least to speak for us. So I wonder if you could say a bit about that. Thanks very much.
Sure. I mean, as I said during my presentation, I actually think that the attacks against the definition are disingenuous. I think that they have, in fact, caused a significant amount of stress and concern for members of the community who see some of the illustrative examples that are listed in IRA as part of their personal lived experience or that of their children or people that they know. But I think that again, I'd go back and say, I think it would be important to use the experiences of our students. Like one of the things that I do when I talk about anti-Semitism, I use the experience that the member of my family had, a niece. During May 2021, when there was the spike in violence between Israel and Hamas, my niece was bullied. She was harassed. She was asked in class, one of her 12-year-old classmates raised the question, who here is Jewish? And my niece innocently raised her hand. And then she got subject to all kinds of harassment and intimidation because of the conflict in Israel. So I don't need to use saying that is one of the illustrative examples of IRA. That just is an example of anti-Semitism where a 12-year-old kid was harassed and bullied because of her identity. It completely aligns with the example in IRA, but I don't need to say it. I don't need to use a document that took months to and years, in fact, over to get to where it was, to talk about the experience of a young person and to say that it's not fair and that it's unjust and that there needs to be the tools in place to help educators, teachers address that specific experience. And there's lots of those kinds of very tangible ways that one can use those kinds of illustrative experiences without having a political debate about whether or not we need to have IRA specifically adopted as a tool. I rather, like I said, the practitioners, the educators, the community organizations that are out there developing the tools to confront the anti-Semitism, to have those illustrative examples in as tangible and a practical a way as possible, so that they can bring that to the attention of administrators, principals, and others in the school board system and other institutions that are responsible for our well-being, so that they understand the lived experience of our community and then have the tools in place to address that experience in a way that we feel safe, we feel welcome, and we feel respected. And right now, I find that too much of the conversation is focused on the political aspects of it, and that doesn't result in the effect that we're seeking, which is the safety of our kids, the safety of our teachers, and the safety of our people in various public circumstances.
Thank you so much for that comprehensive answer. Josh Korn, please unmute.
Good day. The reason I first heard about this and I got in touch with Lisa to begin with was because what I'd heard is decidedly reminiscent of something else that I heard on a cassette tape. It was recorded by my mother, and she experienced almost the same thing in pre-war Poland. So, it was very disturbing to hear this, I'm only here because 5 people by the name of Turek and Sokol stuck their necks out. One of them died, took a bullet, and myself and another 139 odd people are here because of that. Otherwise, we wouldn't have been. Arthur, are you aware that there's a document that's basically the plagiarized IRA definition of anti-Semitism being circulated on the internet? It's called a definition of anti-Palestinianism, and it's virtually word for word the IHRA definition. And its job in life, its major focus, sort of in between the lines, is to equate the Nakba with the Holocaust. Okay, it does a whole lot of other things, but it's also somewhat, well, it's more than somewhat disturbing. It disturbs me because it's gone unchallenged as an act of plagiarism. So that was really quite sobering to see. And I wonder what we have to do to not just defend the definition, but defend the how should I put it? Defend the resistance against what I'd call Jew hatred in the face of people who don't read, don't want to read, who don't know, and who don't want to know.
So, I mean, thanks, Josh, for the question, and for sharing your particular family's experience. I think that a lot of us have those kinds of stories, and it's one of the reasons why so many of us are particularly attuned and feel it's important to respond and address anti-Semitism in terms of how it's manifest today. Look, part of IRA's work, not related to the definition of anti-Semitism, is around Holocaust diminishment and Holocaust denial. And I think that it's important for some of that work to become better known. It's part of the efforts, for example, that Professor Kotler undertakes in his role and responsibility as as Canada's special envoy for Holocaust remembrance and countering anti-Semitism. It's something that's really important, and it's why Holocaust education is so central. It's one of the reasons specifically why organizations like the Center for Holocaust Education and Scholarship are so important, because I think integrating a better knowledge of the Holocaust into the curricula, which is something that the government of Ontario announced that it's going to do now at grade 6 level, is so important. But it's now up to community organizations such as CHESS, such as Federation, such as CJES, such as CAFE and others, to work together to make sure that the tools are there so that the education system can benefit from our experience and our knowledge and develop effective strategies to counter the kind of misinformation, the kind of Holocaust diminishment, to the minimization of our experiences with discrimination. We need those practical, tangible tools. And that will only happen when educators sit down and develop curricula and pedagogical instruments that will engage as broad a range of partners as possible, and making sure that both educators and students have access to it. So again, I'm less interested in having a big conversation about how do we defend a definition, and more interested in that practical work that we need to get down to as a community to make sure that the tools are there so students have access to it when they are most susceptible to receiving the information and retaining it.
Thank you. So we're going to take 2 more questions. Shira Waldman and then Flora Love. Let's go with Shira first, just because she's got the same name as my daughter.
Thank you. Okay. So my problem with the school board, I think, really is that without the IRA definition, how do we protect the kids who are being harassed for being Zionists? Because it's a big part of this new hatred where they're aligning any affiliation with Israel, which is a huge part of being Jewish for all Jews, but also Israeli students or students who have a personal connection with Israel. My daughter was also really targeted in 2021, and the school board, the principal, the superintendent, the trustees, no one did anything. And they basically just wrote it off as it's a difference of political opinions. And there's nothing that they can do because they're different political opinions. So if, in my mind, if we had the IRA, there would be, a legitimate point of, no, this is anti-Semitism.
So you have IRA, that's my point. IRA exists. And as I pointed out, governments have adopted, the federal government adopted IRA years ago. That did not stop the federal government from giving Leif Marouf hundreds of thousands of dollars to actually amplify precisely the messages that you. So for me, adoption is not really the question. The tool is here. It exists. It's using it. And I think that the way you use it is by empowering educators who are professionals in the domain to reach out to administrators and others around the lived experiences of people like you, like your family, who for them to understand better that connection and what the effect is of that kind of language on us. That's a fundamental principle around anti-discrimination. It's not about what your intent was. It's about what the effect of your actions were on the people receiving it. And I think that when we go back to that kind of practical engagement with the school board, which has been part of the conversation that organizations like Federation, like CHESS, like others have been having with the board and with the professionals in that system, is around, okay, now how do we develop those tools so that when teachers are confronted with that situation, that they don't brush it off as a political difference, but understand the effect that it has on students and on teachers, so that then they can appropriately mitigate the effects of that harassment and of that discrimination on students. Having a vote, for example, at the board would be interesting. You'd have a debate, you'd have pros, you'd have cons, you'd have a very political, very public kind of disagreement over its value. And even if it's adopted, it would, in my opinion, that very public disagreement over its content would negatively affect its ability to be used, and would increase reticence on the part of some teachers from using it. I rather the tools be focused again on the experience of your family than on something that was adopted 6 years ago in Bucharest and is already on paper and already accepted by Canada, Ontario, and others. So I'm giving you my recommendation. I'm saying it exists. I'm not sure where the political fight helps you in terms of the end of the day, change the experience of your daughter.
Yeah, they're just not doing anything. They're still not doing anything.
Well, this is where I think that I'm not sure that they're not doing anything. I can tell you that I, as a member of the board of chess, and I know that folks from Federation have met with school board leaders, where we've met with the Ministry of Education, where there's already buy-in at the provincial level, and there's work being done at the school board level to change the approach and to have a more pragmatic kind of experience-related approach to countering the discrimination that Jewish students, teachers, and others face. So we need to keep their feet to the fire. We need to absolutely keep the pressure on. We need to keep meeting. But I think that the way we do that is by continuing the dialogue amongst us as members of the community, continuing the dialogue with other communities that are affected by discrimination and hate, and by continuing to keep administrators and trustees accountable for the experiences of our students and our teachers in the school board in particular.
So if I may just end with one more comment.
Sure.
So just right at the end of October, some students at the same school where we went through the same thing in 2021 were Heil Hitlering my son in grade 11. I again wrote to, it's the same principal that we've spoken to years ago. She's taking a course about the Holocaust. I asked her, Holocaust Remembrance Month is coming. Now is the time. There's obviously a lack of information with the students. We are planning things. Nothing happened. So they're talking, but they're still not doing.
So again, that's not acceptable. That's not acceptable. And I think that this is where we need to make sure that principals like that are accountable to the superintendents and administration, and that we have the instruments available so that if the teacher says, hey, sure, there's somebody there with a program ready to go into the school to be able to explain the situation. So, somebody going and doing a Hitler salute to you, to your child, that, you don't need the controversial aspects of the IRA definition to address that. That's prima facie, like nobody will debate that in terms of the anti-Semitic effect and the anti-Semitic.
They just won't do anything about it.
Well, I mean, this is what. But I think that this is where we have to keep the pressure on and have the tools ready and the programming ready to go into the schools. But I'm not sure that having, again, a definition adopted politically will help. It's just Arthur's opinion. I'm just one member of the community.
Thank you. I'm going to ask Flora Love to address questions.
Hi, everybody. I'd like to preface my remarks, reflections, and question. First of all, I promise to speak very quickly because I have a lot to pack in. I want to preface what I'm about to say. David's laughing his head off already. By a huge, huge thank you to Lisa Levitan and to Mina Cohen and to B'nai B'rith and Sija and Simon Wiesenthal, Frenzov, everybody who contributes to trying to make Canada safer and healthier for all Jewish citizens, as we do, as Lisa says, for everybody else. I'm in my mid to late 60s. I grew up in Montreal, attended Yiddish Volksschule. We were regularly evacuated from our school for bomb threats. I grew up in fear as a Jew. I worked 35 years in the federal public service with systemic and overt anti-Semitism, which I fought. I attended Carleton University and had knives held to my throat when I came out of Zionism is racism lectures, when I put up my hand and asked the question about Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state. I attended the International Educators Program, the scholarship program in Jerusalem at Yad Vashem. And for years, I went into high schools, to police academies, to national defense, to university classes as a volunteer, and to Ottawa School Board district schools, and with my beloved friend David Shento, about whom I made a 2-hour film documentary on the Holocaust. Suffice it to say, when we have Whoopi Goldberg getting up on The Voice saying that Hamas is not a terrorist organization, it depends on your opinion and your perspective. When you have Donald Trump hosting Holocaust deniers at the White House, when you have Kanye West and the likes of those people, and Bella Haddad with a single tweet reaching 200 million followers condemning Israel and Jews, it's no wonder that our poor kids and our parents today in high school, at the university level, on campuses facing Israel Apartheid Week and BDS and all kinds of other naysaying of our rights to exist as Jews in the same safety and security we wish for everyone else, that fighting with this federal government, as I've been doing for almost 30 years on the National Holocaust Monument, first to get it built, and for the last 7 years with international Holocaust colleagues on the anti-Semitic tropes and text on the monument. I've been in dialogue with parliamentarians for 7 years. So here's my question, Arthur. I also want to reflect on the fact that Anita Vandenberg and my own MP, Yasser, for whom I do extensive work, writing pro bono, got up at Lisa's phenomenal Rise Up and professed ignorance. And it was Dr. Neely Kaplan-Murth who got up immediately and said there is no excuse for any parliamentarian today to profess that they don't know what's going on. It is horrific that our kids have people throwing money on the floor and saying, pick it up, Jew, or what color gas do you want? What flavor gas do you want? So we have to do a hell of a lot more. We have to demand with a solid organization, a new front to demand that every parliamentarian from the NDP, the Bloc, the Green, especially the NDP, because of their BDS propensity, we have to demand that they meet with us, and that every Holocaust class taught to grade 6 kids has the correct teachers teaching it. Because believe me, I've worked with a lot of so-called Holocaust educators who know very little about the actual Holocaust, very little. So we have to use the momentum of Lisa Levitan as a springboard, a trampoline, to get a group of us together with every public advocacy organization and demand that parliamentarians at every level of government, including the municipal government, now we have a new mayor here in Ottawa, that they themselves demand absolute sign-on by every school board. And it's not a question of individual parents like Shira having to go and say, I don't want people saying Heil Hitler to my kid. This is unacceptable. We're going into 2023. Jews are under terrible stress worldwide, and we have to stop it now. I grew up with the Holocaust embedded in every fiber, every epigenetic DNA marker in my blood, and I don't want the next generation of kids growing up with the same hellhole. Especially by the time they get to university, it's not acceptable anymore. We need a strong action mode.
Laura Love, I think that's a great segue to Lisa's talk.
So while anti-Semitism is omnipresent, over the past year, Jewish students, teachers, and families have experienced an unprecedented increase of hate. The fact that it's happening in our schools cannot be ignored. And with regards to what was just said, when I'm talking about schools, I'm not only talking about post-secondary colleges and universities. I'm not even only talking about high schools. I teach grade 1. I see it in my grade 1 classroom. So it's becoming younger and younger and more problematic as the years go on, specifically since May 2021. Jewish children as young as 4 years old are being harassed, gaslit, threatened, and attacked simply because they're Jewish. Children and teachers are hiding their Jewish identity while being told that we are entitled and lucky. So how has anti-Semitism become so normalized in schools in such a short period of time to the point where the word anti-Semitism has lost so much of its meaning? Anti-Semitism, Jewish hate, racism, whatever you want to call it, it's hate. It cannot be tolerated. I want to be very clear. Anti-Zionism is always anti-Semitism. This was repeated numerous times at Rise Up Ottawa by every single student presenter and delegate, receiving the loudest round of applause of the day. We need the world to stop defining our own identity. We need the world to stop teaching us when we are allowed to feel safe or unsafe. Minister Lecce's grade 6, that he recently implemented a grade 6 Holocaust curriculum, which is fantastic. And I'm not sure if everybody understands what that means. Excuse me. The reason why it's so fantastic is because currently the Holocaust is being taught as an elective in high schools in grade 10. So it means it's being taught in grade 10, but to students who choose to take this history course that sometimes does or does not include information about the Holocaust. What Minister Lecce did with Friends of Simon Wiesenthal and CEJA and many other wonderful organizations is by having it now in grade 6, when you're in elementary school, you don't get to choose your courses. You are taught everything. So now that it's in the grade 6 curriculum, every single student in Ontario as of September of next year will receive this education. And this is amazing. I'll admit, I felt the exact same way as Flora Love did. I was initially concerned as to how the minister was going to mandate this new curriculum without educating teachers on how to teach the Holocaust properly. But ever since I heard of this announcement, I've been on the phone with everybody I can speak to, including the Office of the Minister of Education, and they've assured me that they are working with CEJA, Friends of Simon Wiesenthal, and Center for Holocaust Studies, and many Jewish federations across Ontario to ensure that they get it right and that the educators get it right. Educators will be trained appropriately. And I can promise you that we will all be teachers like myself. We will be making sure that that is done correctly. So as a Jewish teacher in a public school board who has been on the front lines of receiving daily anti-Semitic reports from parents, teachers, and students, and personal attacks for over a year, trust me when I say that this is not free speech. This is hate speech with one commonality. Everyone thinks that they're alone and no one knows what to do. And as Shira just said right now, it's still happening. Parents are complaining. They're taking what they learned from Rise Up. They are going to the right people and still nothing is being done. I also am proud to be on the board of the Center of Holocaust Education and Scholarship, and they do wonderful, wonderful work. But important to note that no matter what you do, nothing seems to get done, and there's no consequence. Something that also happened, I should mention, in late 2021 is that they removed SROs from schools. So they removed the police from schools in the Ottawa Carleton District School Board. I'm not here to say whether I think that was a good idea or bad idea, but what I am here to say is that there's a lot of things that happened all around that May 2021 timeline, a lot of changes in staffing, and it's not a coincidence that all of these issues are happening at the same time. But when finally mustering up the courage to speak up, we are consistently every single time ignored, dismissed, and we are told what is and what is not anti-Semitic by non-Jewish people. So can you imagine any other race or religion or culture being told what is and what is not harmful to their own identity? I mean, there would be mass protests in all the streets all over the world. Any other race, this would not be happening. Nobody has the right to tell you, and even if it's not about Judaism, nobody has the right to tell you what is and is not harmful. If this is what I teach my 6-year-olds, if someone is telling you something is hurtful, you stop. That's it. You stop. You listen to their lived experiences. They're telling you it's hurting them, and you stop. on the Palestinian youth movement, Instagram and different social media outlets, where they are saying verbatim, we know what we are saying. We are calling for the destruction of Israel. We are calling for the killing of the Jews. Those students, they know what they're saying, and there has to be consequences. I believe in progressive discipline, absolutely. Less suspensions, more education. I am absolutely all about that. But when progressive discipline never progresses, we have a problem. I should also say that for this regular hate speech to be allowed on school property during school hours, this is not about politics. Does anyone ever condone everything that the Israeli government is doing? Of course not, myself included. But I would challenge you to think, does anyone condone everything that the Canadian government is doing? No, definitely not. That's not anti-Semitism, as Arthur said. We're not here to talk about politics. Calling for the destruction of the only Jewish state is anti-Semitism. COVID has brought an immense amount of haters hiding behind the screen who are all looking for someone to blame for everything going on in the world. And of course, we know where the story goes from there because we've all experienced it. But when victims of anti-Semitism are denied the right to defend anti-Semitism, that is anti-Semitism. So stop doing what I would say to the non-Jewish people out there, or unfortunately, the Jewish people out there, very small minority who are very anti-Zionist and anti-Israel in every way, shape, and form, who are coming against the Jewish people, which are the majority, and know that Israel is their homeland and we are indigenous to Israel. I would say this very clearly. Stop doing things for us without us. We are here begging to have you let us help you. The Nazi chant blood and soil, for example, doesn't sound like a call to murder all the Jews when it's out of context. But when you scream it at us, we know what it means. And that's exactly the same thing from river to the sea. So we need to stop using semantics to shield their anti-Semitism. This is Jewish hate, and this is what anti-Semitism sounds like in 2022. So I led Rise Up Ottawa 3 weeks ago in hopes that it would remind everyone that they're not alone in their experiences. I reminded children to speak to their parents, and that telling a teacher is very important. They should always do that first because, quite frankly, they're at school. There's trusted adults all around school. It's going to be your teachers. Go to your teachers and let them know. But whether they help you or they don't, you must always, always tell your parents when you get home. Your parents are your best advocates and they'll know what to do. If parents don't know what to do, I strongly suggest that they contact the Jewish in Ottawa, the Jewish Federation of Ottawa. And if you're in a different city, obviously contact your own federation. Contact Chess in Ottawa, same thing. Contact CJA, contact Friends of Simon Wiesenthal Center, contact B'nai B'rith, contact Canadian Anti-Semitism Education Foundation, contact Lawfare, contact End Jew Hatred, contact the people who have been speaking up for you for decades, and let them know what is going on and let them take over and let them handle it and do the jobs that, quite frankly, they're paid to do because they know how to do it properly. I also told parents to make sure that they contact and speak and sit down with their children about what a typical day at school was like. As I expected, since I did that, I've been overwhelmed by messages from numerous parents who I had never heard from before, who were horrified and many in tears saying, I'm so sorry, we had no idea. And I definitely had no idea this was happening to my child. And I expected this. It was heartbreaking, but I expected this. And while it's certainly not their fault, now you do know. So as parents, you do have a responsibility. So what are you going to do to keep your children safe at school? It's not transferring them to the Catholic school board. We belong everywhere. Parents and community members, it's not only about you. It's not only about your children and your family. It's about what this world is turning into, and specifically in Ottawa, how horrific it has become in such a short amount of time. So how are you going to prepare and educate your children with facts and with Jewish pride? And a big way to do that is to get them enrolled into different programming around Ottawa. And there's amazing programming here. I'm somebody who was never really, I obviously have been a proud Jew my whole life, but I was never really that involved with the programming around Ottawa. And I decided to make it a passion of mine about a year and a half ago. And I tried to go to as many events and organizations and get-togethers as possible. And I couldn't believe all the amazing things that are available here. But what I did notice is when I was speaking to all the rabbis and the leaders of the organizations, is they said they're still struggling immensely from COVID. There were registration for all the programs, whether it be OMJS or Talmud Torah or NCSY or whatever, Camp B'nai B'rith or JCC Day Camp, whatever you're signing your kids up for. Parents aren't signing them up as much as they used to be, and that lack of knowledge of Jewish education and lack of pride of being around people who are learning and having the same struggles as you is very important. So I would strongly suggest that parents attend these sessions as well, and parents get more involved in the Jewish community. But as was said by all 5 of our brave student speakers, children have become so used to Jewish hate in schools that they don't even recognize anymore. They don't even recognize when it's happening. And those who do recognize it have given up, because after all, what would you do if you were them? They continue to speak up. Every time they speak up, they're dismissed by the trusted adults in their community, in this case, in their schools. And then by speaking up, they're now targeted even more by their peers. So students are watching and they're learning from the adults surrounding them, regularly telling them, just let it go, it'll be okay, just let it go. And that's not only the teachers, that's the parents in the community as well. So very important to not let things go, because they are learning to stay silent. They are learning to hide their Jewish identity. And this is what Jewish children are learning in school right now. So it's time for us to rise up and take our humanity back. It's our responsibility as educators, parents, community. I'm the first grandchild of a Holocaust survivor, and I know that this is where I belong, because we all belong everywhere. And I made a promise to my late grandfather, Barry Davis, on his deathbed. The last words that he said to me was, "Don't forget your Zadie." And I will never forget those words. And I knew what he meant by that, because at 9 years old, when I was at OMJS school, he asked me to do a project on my hero. I chose my Zadie. I went to him and I asked him, "What's your favorite color? What's your favorite animal?" And this was the time that he sat me down and told me about the horrific experiences that he endured, and his family, friends, everybody that he lost in the Holocaust. We cannot forget. Those aren't just words. There are fewer Holocaust survivors now than ever before. And it's not a coincidence to me that that's why this is rearing its ugly head. We were warned about this. We've been warned about this from day one. And while I truly empathize with Jewish parents who, especially this past summer, for the first time ever, have switched their Jewish children out of the OCDSB to the Catholic School Board or OJCS, that's not the answer. I understand why you're doing it, and I'm sorry that you had to do it, and I empathize with you, but you can't do that. You can't run away and you can't hide. We have to know that we know better. We've been here before. Human rights are never up for debate. The intergenerational trauma of the Holocaust is very real. And as it was stated just a few weeks ago, Jews haven't experienced this amount of hate since the Holocaust. That's how bad it is. So if anybody thinks that myself or anyone else speaking out are exaggerating, we're not. This is happening right here. And this is 2022. And while I don't like what we're seeing or what we're hearing or experiencing, we must come together. It's the only way. We need to teach those who need our factual information and education in order to keep everyone safe. And many assume that since Rise Up Ottawa, things have gotten better, everything's going well. I'm sorry to say that's not the case. Parents still aren't going to their principals. And as you just heard, the ones that are, nothing's being done. I guess we, the community, just elected a whole new round of trustees. There's going to be a new interim director being announced next week, specifically at the Ottawa Carleton District School Board. This is an opportunity to teach these new staff members what is appropriate and what is not appropriate, because I will bet you that if this was happening to their own identity, their marginalized group, we wouldn't be fighting this for a year and a half. I can promise you, if this happened to somebody who identified as Black or somebody who identified as queer, or somebody who identified as Indigenous. Of course, their experiences are horrific. They're awful. We're there for them. But I can also promise you that there is an immense amount of support from school boards for people dealing with these traumatic instances. There is nothing for Jewish people, nothing. And that's what's not okay. My best friend, Jennifer Distinfano, and I, who are the founders and chairs of JEG, the Jewish Educators Group, which we started a year and a half ago, first time ever at the school board, we have been fighting hard to be heard for a year and a half, and we were heard. And we had meetings on a regular basis all last year with the senior staff and the trustees, and things changed. This year, not one call, not one email, no communication with us at all. And we represent the Jew, because we have a group of the Jewish teachers in the school board, and they are not coming to us. They are not asking our opinions for anything. And with all due respect, we appreciate the help. We want the help. We need the help, but you need to involve us, because if you're not a teacher in the school board, I'm sorry, again, respectfully, you don't know the policies and procedures that have to take place. You need us and we need you. So please work with us. I'd like you to ask yourselves, how many of you have taken these 10 seconds, the 10 seconds that it takes to sign this petition that I'm trying to get sent to the Minister of Education? Because I agree with Arthur 100%. I don't think that going to the school board and trying to get IRA adopted is the way to go at all. I am a very strong IRA supporter. There's no question about it. To me, it needs to come from the ministry. As Arthur said, it's already adopted by Ontario. The Minister of Education is the government. The government already follows IRA. It's already there. So what if you're going to do something for IRA, in my opinion, you need to go to the Minister of Education and have him mandate that IRA be used as the guiding definition of anti-Semitism, the tool that they use to know what anti-Semitism is. But it's important that what's done is done for everybody and not just one city at a time. And I would actually, respectfully, for me, what I've seen is I think we do need some sort of definition. And to me, that definition is IRA, because if you can't define something, how can you say that this is happening? On the other hand, I agree with Arthur. When somebody is doing something hateful, it's pretty clear as day to say, this is hate, this is what's happening. There should be a consequence in place, and that's not happening either. So something needs to give. So what can you do? So number one, we need a definition, and we need this and if they're not going to use a definition, we need consequences. And I'm not for consequences, but we need consequences in place for students, and more importantly, educators who are teaching the false narratives and the Jewish hate, and that Zionism is now a bad word, and the apartheid state. We need consequences for those educators who are educating our next generation to hate Jews and hate Israel, because that is absolutely what they're doing. Number two, we need mandatory anti-Semitism training for all staff and students in all of Ontario, and it needs to all be the same. We can't have one school being trained by Friends of Simon Wiesenthal and one school being trained by Chess and one school being trained by CJA. No, it needs to be everybody coming together, decide what it's going to be, everyone get the same training and know what Jewish hate really is. And then finally, on a personal level, because I am in Ottawa, we need a Jewish equity coach at the OCDSB. There's no question about it. We've been fighting this for over a year and a half, begging the director of education and the equity staff. They have an equity department. And right now, as it still stands, because they haven't done anything about this, if you are Jewish and you are experiencing anti-Semitism, whether you're a child or a teacher or a parent, you are sent to a non-Jewish equity coach. And to me, that doesn't make any sense, because if I was, I'm going to be really frank, if I identified as a Black woman and I was experiencing anti-Black hate, and I was then sent to myself, to someone who identifies as Jewish and Ashkenazi, I would probably have a problem with that. So we need to have this Jewish equity coach in the school board yesterday. So I'm just going to finish by saying that we must not hide, we must not run away, and we must never combat hate with hate, but we have to come together. We have to rise up, because never again is right now. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, I'm watching the clock and I am seeing some comments that people are very interested in the conversation, but want to watch the timing. So in the interest of time, I'm going to take three questions right now, and I'm going to do them again in the order that they came up. I see Robert, and if I mispronounced your name, I apologize. Yeah, Robert is waving at me. Kabaka. Frederick Litwin and Cindy Seligman. We'll take you three on this segment, and then we're going to turn it over to Gerard. I will watch the time, and the other people that have their hands up, we'll hopefully take your questions after Gerard presents, but I'm really anxious that everybody hear all the speakers before they have to drop off. So if you could please be brief and just ask a question, and give our speaker a chance to answer, and then we'll move on. Robert, Frederick, Fred, and then Cindy, please.
And important to know that this is not the end. We will have more conversations about this. Hi, Rob.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Okay. All right, great. I'll frame it as a brief question.
Okay.
Why am I not hearing what sounds to me like the, I'm going to use my fanciest word, sine qua non of any confrontation, of any battle? Why am I not hearing educating our children how to not be such attractive targets? I'll give you one example, and then I'll make my point. I'll bet everybody here, their children and their grandchildren know who Anne Frank is. I'll bet that same group, almost none of them know who Tzivia Lubetkin is. My point is that we are looking for help outside of ourselves. We want the law, we want the definition, we want the teachers. We don't want ourselves to learn how to stand up and be willing to make a sacrifice to defend our honor. When people attack me like they attacked the niece, I say to them, number one, I'm not on trial. And number two, you're not my judge. Go take a hike. Why don't I hear that? Thank you.
Thank you. So I think I can answer that pretty quickly. I with all due respect, that is what, yeah. And I understand your passion. Trust me, I'm with you. I am doing that. To be, with all due respect, I am putting my job at risk. I am getting, and it's not all about me, of course. It's not about me. It's not about the kids. Quite frankly, it's what is our, what's going to happen in 5 or 10 years when all these kids are, like I said, are running our countries. But I am absolutely fighting back in the most respectful way that I can. But I understand why other Jewish teachers and non-Jewish teachers, because of course there's a lot of non-Jewish teachers that know this is unacceptable. I understand why they're not. They don't want to lose their jobs. I mean, a lot of people have to pay the rent. I know it's awful, and I get that.
I'm talking about the children. I'm talking about our children. We don't teach them to stand up, become willing to make a sacrifice to defend their honor and their lives. Why don't we do that? Why are we a nation of Anne Franks and not Tzivia Lubetkins? And I don't mean you, I mean our children. Why don't we do it?
So I don't know the answer to that, but I'm going to say that I would never encourage any child, or anyone for that matter, to fight hate with hate, ever. I would never promote, I'm just going to say this quickly. I can see you're upset. I'm sorry, but I'm just going to say I would never promote violence of any kind. Students are speaking up, and they are trying, and they keep getting shut down. And that's why they're saying, and we're saying, and that's why we've come together as End Jew Hatred and CAF and Lawfare, and we've come together to say it's time for the adults to step in. Because I will say that a few parents who have told their Jewish children, you need to step up, you need to fight back, to be really blunt, they've gotten the crap kicked out of them. Okay. And I can't get those calls anymore at night. I can't. This isn't about aggression, and we definitely don't want to teach any kind of hate and any kind of violence in any way, shape, or form to our children, to Jewish or non-Jewish children alike. We want to teach understanding and education and what is and is not acceptable. And if something is happening that is hateful, then to me, the principal, superintendent, sits down with that child, with that family. If it's a hate crime, you involve the police and you figure it out so that you can make sure that it never happens again. That's the way I would go about it.
Well, thank you, Lisa, for organizing this. And I have to say, I do agree that the IHRA definition is a perfectly good definition of anti-Semitism, and I support it fully. But the problem that I see here is that there seems to be a disconnect between the depth of the problem we're facing and the meekness of the call to action. You know, I feel like we're sort of on the Titanic.
Yeah.
And the call to action is, you know what, we're on the Titanic, but please go down to deck 3 because there's a committee meeting going on to discuss the definition of how we send out an SOS. And on deck 4, we're actually going to talk about some of the tools you might need to go fight this sinking of the ship. And you know what, deck 7, we have 3 more committees by other groups. Pick the committee that best suits what you want to do, and that's where we're going to fight it. Look, we have a massive problem here, and it's not just IHRA, and it's not an equity coach. We have a cultural problem here. We have to fight the whole curriculum of anti-racism that teaches people that colonialism and imperialism are massive evils, and Israel is part of it. We have a cultural problem that we have to face.
Violence is never the answer, and I understand everyone's passionate and aggravating. It's aggravating. There's nobody here that is not upset about this, and upset doesn't even begin to explain how frustrated we are. I don't even know what the word is. What's happening is unacceptable, but to any kind of violence whatsoever is not. That is not what I stand for. I know that's not what Arthur that's not where is that going to get us? That's not what we're doing here.
It's a matter of the disconnect between the solutions and what we're talking about and the depth of the problem. And the fact is, we are being meek in our solutions, and they don't address the problems that you seem to be talking about, which seem to be very, very deep.
Yeah, they are, and I agree with you. And I'm going to we're going to go to the next speaker. I appreciate that, Fred. And to be honest with you, my answer to that is I don't have an answer, because I'm a grade 1 teacher in Ottawa, and I know you're not looking for an answer from me, but this is where we have the problem, because what do you do when this keeps happening and nobody's doing anything and nobody's listening?
No, I do have one answer. I mean, you talk about the problem you face with grade 1s. I don't know whether having Holocaust education in grade 6 helps people if there's a problem in grade 1. The one idea that I do have, I've told this for a lot of people in Holocaust education is useless unless there's a segment in it about Zionism. And it should end with the beauty of Zionism and the redemption of the Jewish people through Zionism. That's the way you end Holocaust education.
Yeah. And I think I'll just finish answering your question, if you don't mind, by saying that I think it's and again, you know, I'm the first grandchild of a Holocaust survivor. I know very well, just as many people on this call tonight understand, Holocaust education is primal. It's very important. But I also am of the mindset that Holocaust education cannot define us as Jews. It cannot define anti-Semitism. It's not all about the Holocaust. Of course, never again. We don't want it to happen again, but it's happening again and again and again. And that's the Holocaust. It was awful. There's nothing to say about that. And people need to know that it happened. There's no question, but it can't be our sole identity. And the Holocaust and anti-Semitism are not always intertwined. So thank you very much, Fred. I appreciate that. Okay.
So that is a good, certainly Gerard is going to be addressing some of the action items. I did promise Cindy, if you could perhaps be very, very brief, if you don't mind, so we can move on to Gerard. And thank you very much. Go ahead and unmute yourself, but please, very direct question.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, Lisa, thanks for your presentation, so passionate. I wanted to speak, you just mentioned something that I was going to raise. I understand the importance of Holocaust education, there's no question, and the definition from IRA. My concern is that when I speak to people, young and old, that have some form of hatred towards Israel, I think it stems from the fact that they don't know the history of the Jewish people to the land of Israel. They don't know their indigenous relationship to the land. And so all they think about is that after the Holocaust, And they believe that the Holocaust existed and that it should not happen again. But they think that after the Holocaust, that was the first time that Jews ever stepped onto this piece of land, this small piece of land.
Yeah.
And until we educate people, knowing that Palestinians have rallied together for the past 20, 25 years on university campuses in the education areas, we don't have a chance unless we educate as well. So I think going through the Ministry of Education, going through Stephen Lecce or whoever else is in that position, not just for Holocaust education, but for, as you mentioned, learning about the history of the Jewish people and their indigenous nature to the land is key. That we did not take the land from, quote, the Palestinians. Jews were there for thousands of years. There's a lack of knowledge and even talking points. When you speak to somebody that may not be racist, when you speak to anyone that just wants to have an understanding of Israel, a lot of Jewish people don't have sort of the 5 or 10 key points that they can just share with people to give this basic knowledge. And I think that's what we're lacking in.
Yeah, and I would agree 1000%. And I'll put myself in that boat as well. That before a year and a half ago, I didn't know as much as I do now, certainly, and I still don't know everything. And I think you're absolutely right. The history of Israel and the history of the Jews in Israel and it being the only state, like I want to be very clear, I am for a 2-state solution. There's no question about it. And I'm not here to silence any voices, including the Palestinian students and children and parents at all. But it's important to know your facts. And a lot of the things that are being said are not factual. They're just more popular. And I agree with you that would be an amazing first step. I'm not in a public school. I highly doubt that they're ever going to accept doing Jewish education, just like we don't do Catholic education or Muslim education. We don't do that in public schools because it's not supposed to be based around a religion. And I don't know if you're going to be able to get them to teach about Israel, that this is something that this is some sort of course or workshop or whatever it has to be, that I agree is severely lacking, not only with the students so that they know what to say, and they don't know what to say, but with the teachers and quite frankly, with the parents, because there are a lot of parents, like I'm not a parent, but I'm a parent age. There are a lot of adults here and that are here and that aren't here that still don't know all the facts about what happened. And I would say actually a lot more than we think. And so I think education is power always.
Could I just say one more thing?
Sure.
I was a teacher for 34 years and I taught in a high school. And I remember I was evaluating a presentation for a grade 13 class. That's how far it goes back, OAC grade 13.
Yeah.
And I remember sitting at desks. I was teaching a science-based course and the kids were evaluating each other as well at the time. And one student said, oh, to the other student, oh, don't be such a Jew, because they gave him a low mark. And the students saw the look on my face, and the student across from me, who I had mentored, who I had helped with his relationship with his girlfriend, took one look and looked over at the other guy and said, oh my God, I think she's Jewish. They didn't really know. We're going back to the early 80s, okay? That boy wrote me a note at 2 o'clock in the morning because he saw the way I looked, apologizing and said he was raised in a family that they said, don't Jew me down, and all these comments, and felt so terrible. I talked to that student. He said, I changed his life forever because I had that one-on-one conversation, talked about being Jewish and what it stands for, etc. It was a matter of educating. People are ignorant in many ways about Jewish people and about Israel.
I will agree. And thank you very much for your comment. I will just say that something to consider, and I'm certainly not saying all, but something to consider is that what's happening to us teachers is that we would, like now, a lot of us, if we were to say something like that or to show that we were upset with something they were saying, or to say, hey, what you're saying about Jewish people is not factual, we get a lot of hate from those parents who are saying, no, it is factual. And we know it's not, but they're saying to them it is. And that's very difficult, because then we have certain students whose parents call and say, oh, we found out she was Jewish. We don't want our children in her classroom. And I want to be clear, I celebrate everything. Every year and around this time, I do a big light theme, and we do Christmas and Eid and Diwali and Hanukkah and everything to show that we're a lot more alike than we are different, because that's what it truly is about. And especially for the young kids, they don't care who they're friends with. They're little. The only time they're choosing not to be friends with somebody is when their parent says, don't be friends with that kid because they're Jewish. And that's horrific. That happened, you know, decades ago, and it's starting to happen again now. So it's very difficult. I'm just going to finish with, it's very difficult as teachers, and as a fellow teacher, I'm sure you understand, very difficult as teachers to be doing this work and to be trying to teach the facts when then we have parents who have a different version of what they feel is factual. Difficult.
Thank you.
But thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Well, thank you. Now we're on to our last speaker, and then we'll have a brief question period at the end. Gerard, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Anita. Hi, I'm Gerard Felitti. I'm an attorney and senior counsel at the Lawfare Project, a civil rights lawyer, basically. And I'm also an activist with the End Jew Hatred movement. The hard part of going last is there's so many great points that have been raised that I'd love to address and find time for. But I'd like to start by thanking Lisa, first and foremost. Without her passion and her courage and her strength to come forward and do this, we would not be where we are today. We would not have heard from the students, and that is so crucially important. And I'd also like to thank Anita Bromberg and Michael Tepper for having spent, for donating so much of their time to speak with families who have experienced anti-Semitism in the schools, who have gone through this and don't know where to turn to and needed legal help. Now, I can tell you a little bit about my experiences in the US and in Canada and what I've seen. And I'll tell you that the most important thing is listening to what students have to say, listening to the kids, because we need to know what's going on in the schools in order to change what's going on. And so often I've come across situations where people have come to me saying, my kid experienced so-and-so in school. They were called something. They were told something. They were told that they're not real Jews, or they were told that they have no right to steal other people's land, and we don't know what to do about it. And one of the first questions I asked them is, well, how long ago was this? And they tell me 2-3 years ago. And unfortunately, that's a problem, because in the legal system, there's statute of limitations. You have to be able to bring issues to light as quickly as possible. So that's why it comes back to listening to your kids, asking them questions, knowing what's going on in the classroom, both what other students are doing and what teachers are teaching them. Because if you don't know and you can't take action in a timely way, you're not going to have any opportunity to influence what happens. You can't change it. There's nothing that the law can do about it years after the fact. So you need to be on top of what's going on in the schools. And that's why Rise Up Ottawa was so important, is it taught us, listen to the kids, listen to what's going on. Some people knew this, a lot didn't. It sparked conversations in families to know what kids are experiencing. And that's crucial, because we can't get to change things if we don't know what's happening. And part of what's happening is in the US and Canada, it is actionable if there is a pervasive hostile environment directed at especially minority students. But the problem is you need to give the school a chance to do something about it. You can't just come into school saying, this happened to my kid, I demand consequences. Well, you can, but you need to give the school the chance to do something, which is why when I've dealt with people, when other lawyers have dealt with people who have had kids experience anti-Semitism, we encourage them, you have to come forward. There's nothing that can happen if you don't go to this teacher, to the school principal, to the school board, to the Minister of Education, the Department of Education in the US. If you don't complain, if you don't let them know what happened and give them a chance to fix it, there is no next step. It dies there. So the most important thing that I've seen, that I've experienced, that I need to relate, is you need to be vocal. You need to know what's going on, and you need to have the courage to come forward and talk about it, and to complain about it, and to be persistent about it. Because when it harms students, ultimately, that's the responsibility of these school boards. It's the responsibility of the teachers and the principals. It's to protect the kids, to make sure that their rights are upheld. But if we're not vigilant, if we're not on top of them, that doesn't happen. And we keep having these problems. Now, Lisa said something very, very interesting, and it really strikes a point. If this were to happen, and I'm paraphrasing here, if this were to happen, if what our kids are experiencing, what Jewish kids are experiencing in schools were to happen to any other minority group, we know that there would be quicker consequences, quicker action, quicker resolutions. We all know this. But it's worth mentioning here why that's the case. because other groups have spent decades fighting for civil rights. They've identified themselves as minority communities. They came together in civil rights movements. Even in the last 10 years in the US and in Canada, you see Black Lives Matter. You see all the LGBTQIA plus movements. It took people years to get to the point where their rights were recognized, where in the US, we have a phrase, equal protection under the law. In order to have that equal protection, you need to identify, you need to be together, you need to fight for your civil rights. And until we do that as the Jewish community, as the Jewish people, we won't be able to get those quick results. We won't be able to just walk in there and expect that we will be treated with respect and dignity. Other minority groups have fought for it for decades. And this is why, putting my law hat off for a moment, this is why I'm an advocate and an activist in the End Jew Hatred movement. It is the civil rights movement of the Jewish people of our time. This is what we need in order to be able to demand a Jewish equity coach. There is no clear-cut law that says you must have this. But how do we get this is by activism. It's by coming together, by marching to the school board in numbers and saying, this is what we're entitled to because of our identity. Going to Arthur's point, definitions, defining, IRA is essential. We need, as a lawyer, I'll tell you, we need definitions. We want definitions. But we can't be bound by definitions, because ultimately it's not about a textbook example. It's about how we identify. It's about including Jewish identity in all its forms. It's about Zionism. It's about recognizing indigeneity to our ancestral homeland. It's not about politics or policy. It's about our basic right to exist and to identify and to express our identity beyond a definition. We already have those rights. Those are civil rights. Those are human rights. That's the way we need to phrase the narrative. That's why we need to be there demanding our civil rights, demanding our human rights, going to tribunal to enforce change, because we're entitled to this as part of our identity beyond what's written in a definition. Yes, definitions are essential. When you go to court, you need to be able to lift that piece of paper and say, this is the standard that you need to use. But for everything else, it's not about a definition. It's about recognizing and empowering ourselves to have our identity. And that is what the End Jew Hatred movement is about. It's about mobilization. It's not, we are not End Jew Hatred. You are End Jew Hatred. Everyone here can be an activist, an advocate. It's not a registered charity. It's not a 501c3. It's not an organization. It brings together people from any organization or from none, from Reform synagogues, Reform temples, from synagogue, from across the spectrum. It doesn't matter if you're a liberal, if you support labor, if you're a conservative. It's not about politics. It's about saying you're Jewish, you're proud of your identity, and you want to fight to end Jew hatred. It's not about Israeli politics. It's not about what happens in Israel. That we are not defined by a conflict that goes on half the world away. We are defined by how we express our identity. And that's the power of a movement, is all of our voices together being able to march to that school district, to march to the principal's office, to march to the school board, to march to Minister Lecce's office and say, this is what we need, because this is what we are entitled to as human beings, as a minority group like any other. We are entitled to our dignity. We are entitled to be respected. And this is what we need you to do to get to that point. That's what a movement is. And we need you. We need a chapter of End Jew Hatred in Ottawa. We need to be able to unite to address Jew hatred. So what does this really mean? It means we need regular meetings to discuss the problems you're facing. It means discussing how you want to act together to address them in a way that's legal, that's not promoting violence or anything else. And you have the strategic, the legal, the financial support of all the movement to help you in your endeavors. And what I encourage you to do now is, take a few minutes right now, if you can, send an email to action@endjewhatred.com. Tell us about you. My name is Gerard. I live in Forest Hills. I'm good at writing or creating graphics or organizing events or posting content on social media. Or I work in HR and I want to be sure that my company is active in making sure that we include Jewish identity and diversity training. Or I'm a teacher and want to be active in promoting Jewish identity and diversity training. what can you do? What are you good at? What are you willing to do? What are you interested in doing to help everyone else? Because when we put your skills and your passions together with those of the people, everyone else on this Zoom, then we can start to get somewhere. Then we can start to come together and fight for what we need. And we need people in Ottawa. We need people to be active. We need to know, we need you to show up. We need you to show up at events. At Rise Up Ottawa, the power, looking in the room and look at the videos, Lisa did such a great job with the videos. Look at the videos and see hundreds of people wearing a t-shirt that has a message. It's not an organization. You can have your J teacher stand with us, your husband, your whatever organization, that's great, but it's a message. That's the message that unites us. We want to end Jew hatred. And when you have people with the same message, going to a government office, going to a company that discriminates, going to any place where we see Jew hatred, that's where you make a difference. It gets you in the news, it gets you in popular consciousness. People will realize that we're serious, because sending an email, sending a letter, venting on social media, if it's not organized, it's not going to get you anywhere. We need the power of the people. That's how other groups, that's how every other minority group got to be where they are today. That's why there's a Black equity coach. That's why there's an LGBTQ diversity program, because other people came together. And we need you, everyone who's on this call, we would love for you to be able to come together and do these things. So send us a message. We want to be able to help you organize in meetings and chapters to be able to come together. Even if it's writing a letter together, and let me give you an example, a concrete example about action, following up from Rise Up Ottawa. Before the school term ends for the year, for the holidays, for the winter holidays, whatever we call them, that's politically correct these days, we want to do an action, a simple but a powerful one, and even if it's -20 outside. We want to send a message to the school board, literally send a message, a letter, a simple letter. Jew hatred in our schools has gotten to the point where it can no longer be tolerated. You've heard, you, the school board, have heard from parents, you've heard from teachers, you've heard from educators. More importantly, you've heard from the children, you've heard from your students. They've spoken clearly, passionately, and unambiguously. Here's a video recording of them speaking at the Rise Up Ottawa event. Now, you have an obligation to help them. You have a duty to do something for them. Listen to them. Hear what they said at Rise Up Ottawa. It's on you to make change. It's on you to make situation better. And hey, we'll see you next year. Simple letter. Blow it up. Massive postcard. Have children and their parents walk it into the school board. That's a message. That's how minority groups get to where they are, to the recognition of their rights, by coming together to deliver a message, to deliver a letter. That's an action. That's the sort of thing that you do with activism. That's end Jew hatred in a nutshell. And we expect action from the school board, and it's hard for them to reject. What are you going to do? You're going to tell your children, your students, no, we're not going to take a letter from you. What message does that send? That makes the school board look draconian and evil, more so than they already are. This is how we advance change. So you take that letter, blow it up to poster size, march it and deliver it to the school board. That's a message, that's action, that's end Jew hatred. And that's what we need your help with, because we need people to come together to do this sort of thing. And when you do this sort of thing, it's not just the action. There's the legal consequences, because guess what? Now the school board is on notice. They've seen the people, they've seen the video. They can't say, no, we had no idea this was going on. They can drag their feet. Yes, that happens all the time, but they can't deny that they've been presented with this issue. They can't deny that they have an obligation to do something about it. So the pressure is on them to act. And if they don't act, then there's the possibility of legal action. And that's why, you talk, I'm sure that, Anita, Michael, myself, we're happy to listen to the situations that you're dealing with, to help see if there's some idea for legal action or any other action that we can do. But until that time, or even as we do this, we need direct action. We need end Jew hatred action. We need you to come together. We need you, we need you on board with delivering that blown up letter to the school board before the term ends. There's a new director. There will be a new interim director. What better opportunity than to give them a letter telling them what's going on in their schools and giving them the opportunity to address it? Because once that happens, then we can go on to the next step. Then we can start seeing what particular harm students are encountering, how they're experiencing, what effect it has on them, how, whether it's pervasive and hostile, it's affecting negatively their psychological well-being, their ability to benefit from education, their ability to participate in activities to the same extent as other students. Those are the legal issues, but to get there, we need activism. We need people to come together, assert their rights, and we frame it in the language of civil rights, because ultimately this is what it is. It's the ability of a minority people. Let's face it, we are a minority people. It's about the rights of minority people to be respected, to be shown dignity, to be recognized for their indigeneity to their homeland, to be recognized for their basic human rights, the same as any other people. But until we come together to demand that, we're not going to get change. So as a lawyer, we work the system. We know what the law is. We know how to follow the procedure. We have a drawn-out process, but that's not enough. We need activism. That's how, and I'm sorry for repeating myself, but this is a very important point. That's how other minority groups have gotten to where they are today, by coming together and demanding action. And that's what I'm asking all of you to do, to join, to participate, to join in these NGO hate actions. And we really need that.
Okay, well, thank you. Now we have we're over time, as everybody knows, but thank you for sticking with us, because this conversation is fascinating. I see 2 hands raised. Robert and Karen, again, if you could please keep your questions brief and to the point, and we'll wrap it up after that then. Robert, perhaps first?
One of the takeaways for me from the Rise Up event, Gerard, was one of the things you said, which is treat this like a civil rights movement. And that really struck a chord with me. I feel like, and what Arthur was saying earlier, maybe don't spin our wheels on the IHRA. Like, we have this issue, which is our schools aren't safe for kids. And one thing that's come up is, I mean, I caught a bit of what Lisa was saying, but it cut out, which is, if this was, a group coming and saying, we're going to lynch Black kids, there would be outroar, kids would be suspended, but it doesn't happen for Jews. And maybe we simply need to be going to the board and saying, nobody cares about this. Nobody wants to do anything. Can you provide a rubric for your administrators and your educators to say, like, if a kid says, I'm going to go kill some Jews, maybe something should happen? Because the problem that, if you listen to the trustee meetings here in Toronto, there's groups of educators online that are very anti-Semitic, anti-Zionist, and fine. I feel like we're kind of beyond the point of, let's reach out to them. Maybe, like, we need something to be done. And I feel like we keep reaching out and saying we need something to be done, but they just kind of kick the can down the road. Is there a problem with us approaching and saying, this is what we want you to do, as opposed to asking them to do something? And secondly, there's some people that have just drank the Kool-Aid. They're going to hate Jews. There's no changing that. But there's some people who've only gotten a whiff. And there's a lot of misinformation out there. Are there groups that are countering Anti-Apartheid Week or BDS movements to kind of shine a light, maybe play to people's objectivity?
Well, to start in reverse order, I know that SSI, Students Supporting Israel, has started a Palestinian Apartheid Week. They're changing the narrative and putting it where a lot of us, quite frankly, think it belongs, that the real apartheid is what the Palestinians do to their people, not anything having to do with Israel. So there are groups that are countering that. And the funny thing is, I was having this conversation with a colleague this morning. We do need a comprehensive set of resources, because there's so many organizations out there that are doing good things, that have resources that specialize perhaps in one area or another, but we need a comprehensive kind of collection of what these resources are. Because every organization has strengths. Every organization has something to offer. But because there's a lot, not even competition, there's so many of them, it's hard to find the resources you need. If you go on Google and look for them, even, you don't really know. So I don't have a direct answer to the specific resources that you may need. I'm always available to discuss separately. But I think that it's vital that we start to collect those resources in one centralized place, because there's so many good groups doing so many good things that it's a shame not to have those resources at the disposal of the community. And for the civil rights point, I think you're absolutely right. It's just saying, please change something is not enough. We need to say, this is what we need you to do. We need you to impose consequences on people who engage in Jew hatred, who hurt our children. You know, we don't want the bad apples to continue being there in a position of influence. If you've harmed a student, if you've harmed someone with Jew hatred, and you can't be educated and rehabilitated, then you should not be in that position. The same as with hate crimes. If you have someone who attacks a Jew for being Jewish, that person belongs in jail. They don't belong out on the street to do it again. And that's more an extreme and a clear-cut example, but the same thing with people who engage in casual anti-Semitism or believe in racial superiority or do anything else that harms Jews. We don't want them in a position where they can continue doing that, especially if they can't be educated and rehabilitated. Because I do believe that there's something to be said for education and rehabilitation. We want to give people a chance. But when they show that they can't do that, when what they do is harmful, and they continue this pervasive attitude of discrimination, we don't want them to be in those positions. And you're right. I mean, we need concrete demands. And I think that's one of the things I like about End Jew Hatred is when people get together, they want specific things. They see a way, and it's different in each city, in each situation, but they see the things that will actually make a difference, and they push and they make those demands. In the US at the University of Southern California, they demanded similar things. For example, identifying Zionism as part of Jewish identity, having Jewish identity, including Zionism, as part of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Those specific demands were made, and to a large extent, they were accepted, and they're being incorporated now. It wasn't just, oh, do something about this. Because you know what? If we just ask them to do something and don't tell them what we need, they'll find someone to come in and teach the wrong thing. They'll come in, they'll find someone from the Jewish community who will teach us that Zionism is bad or that it's not part of our identity. They'll find someone who say that anti-Semitism only comes from right-wing extremists who are a swastika. So it's not enough to just ask them to do something, but you're absolutely right. We need to tell them, give them a framework, give them details of what we need to make change.
And some of the things you're describing are happening, where like they're bringing in people who don't necessarily represent what most Jewish people are thinking or feeling. But I think overall, like as you start digging deep into some of the stuff, some of the stories you've heard and some of the things you see that are open to the public, essentially like we're at the point where they just don't care. Like they even had a OCDSB Cares platform where you could, write in anonymously and say that you have a problem. And they listed every group except Jews and anti-Semitism, knowing they had this anti-Semitism issue. It's almost like they're trying to be blatant at this point. And so some of these things like Holocaust education, all these things are great, but what do you do if the other side doesn't really care? Like, I feel like that's where we are. And that's why I'm thinking more like, let's first thing, keep our kids safe by, something simple. Like if you threaten kids, that is a problem. We can tell our administrators that. Is there something, like I'm not an educator, there might be something I'm totally missing here about like how things work as far as, like I don't want, to obviously punish tons of kids, but like kids just need to go to school and be safe. And so this is where I feel we're at. This is where I kind of get sense some of the frustration for some people tonight, is that we keep doing this whole, maybe do something. And if you start reading the fine lines, they kind of don't want to. So I'm just not sure where it goes. If you reach this point from your experience, what do you do next?
Part of the answer to that is using the language that has worked for other groups and setting aside IRA. And again, I love the IRA definition as a lawyer, but as an activist, it's not enough, because we don't need someone to define our identity. If nowadays, if you, whatever color of your skin, whatever your ethnic background, if you go and tell a Black person what it means to be racist or what it means to be the victim of racism, you are dehumanizing them. You are delegitimizing their identity. If you tell someone who identifies as non-binary that, you don't, that's not an option for them. You are dehumanizing them. You are delegitimizing their identity. And that's language. That's the language, the modern language of civil rights. That's the language that we should be using, because it doesn't matter that certain perception of Jewish people, fine. But if someone is, when we're dealing with Jew hatred, it's a matter for all of us to go in there and say, you are dehumanizing. You're not respecting my identity in the way I choose to express it, in the way that a lot of the Jewish community, most of the Jewish community choose to express it. So by not listening to me, by not accepting this as anti-Semitism, or by not doing anything about it, you are denying my human rights. You are denying my equality with everyone else. That's the language that's worked for other minority groups. And quite frankly, that's the language we should be using.
I'm going to take Karen and Shira, and I think we're ready to wrap up after that. Please be mindful of the time, though.
Yeah. Thank you, Anita. I'm in a very funny position of agreeing with almost all of what the speakers have said, in whole and in part. And Robert gave the perfect lead-in to my question. I'll have to pose the question first and then make some suggestions. The question that he said is, well, what are we going to do next? When are we going to have the next conversation? Gerard, you spoke about the importance of activism being on, and we have to have the end Jew hatred. We also, as Lisa said, we have to have people know what's really going on. And Arthur, absolutely, I mean, Arthur and I have worked together for so many years. In fact, I was honored to be at both of those Stockholm conferences where the IRA was actually created. Gerard, we have a long history in Canada as well, and we've got some of the tools and some of the laws. What each of you has indicated is that this is a multifaceted, interdisciplinary field. And when we talked about, and Lisa said, we have to all work together. This is indeed a multidisciplinary field. And I think that each of those speakers and each of the organizations cannot do it all. And they won't all get together to do it in a strategic, coordinated way. The person on the inside can't necessarily be the one with the placards on the outside. We need to, we were told years and years ago in our teaching, we shouldn't use military language. But if we're in a war against anti-Semitism, any good general knows they've got to have different flanks doing different things. Lisa was right that people have to communicate with each other and let each other know what they're doing. But different people need to approach the director or the lawyers. Different people have to be on the outside and making allies. And people who know the language of anti-racism and critical race theory, who are Jews, are the ones who have to do the teacher education so that they're not going to be calling Jews white supremacist colonial oppressors. So the Holocaust education in the context of anti-racist education and so on. I'm going to stop talking, but I'm going to ask, my question is, when can we have the next meeting of this group? But the topic will be, here are the policies by which the board has to operate that we can use. That could be one possibility. Another speaker, here are the resources that already exist on which we can build. The Yom HaShoah Teacher's Guide, that when I headed the League for Human Rights of B'nai B'rith, Gerard, that's the ADL in Canada. The Yom HaShoah Teacher's Guide, the Taking Action Against Hate manual, and the Facing History and Ourselves, the new materials from CIJA, from chess, from all. There's an old Chinese expression, people who say it can't be done shouldn't interrupt the people who are doing it. But those people who are doing it, who have access at senior levels, the scholars in the universities from the Department of Jewish Studies, They admitted to me they could teach about anti-Semitism. They didn't know what to do about it. And so that's where we all come in strategically, and not necessarily one organization or one collective being able to do it all. We need it all. When I was with the ADL, I would have a sweater and so I could go out and do a placard and then go to the meeting with the CEO of the organization or the director of education in a suit. So we need all of these strategies effectively coordinated, not competing with each other, but I think we can do it. I think we can do it, but not if we scream and yell, and not if we're not strategic. And it can't be that everybody thinks that they could play every role, and nobody said they could, but it starts to sound like it when we know the situation, and then we say, what can we do about it? So we can help them know what to do about it. So I'm asking you, my one question is, when can we have another meeting and find out, all of you need to find out who don't know what resources have been created in the last 40 years, 50 years of doing this work in Canada, and what policies those school boards are violating of their own policies, that we can hook them on and be strategic in holding them to account and doing effective teacher education and administrators education and everybody's education. There needs to be more communication with each other so that they do know what each other's saying, and we pick the general and the lieutenant and the whoever that has the skill to go and do it, because we're on the same side. And what I hear too much of is Jews cutting down other Jews, Zionists cutting down other Zionists because they think that they're using strategies that they don't like. So that's what we've got to stop. And when we have an Archer who was right there and knows all the details, and when we have an Anita who has done what she's done, and when we have people on this screen who know how to be strategic. Anita knows that when she was working with B'nai B'rith, she did something different than I did, because I come at it as a teacher educator, an educational psychologist, and a human rights activist who was part of the civil rights movement. So we learned those skills, Gerard. And what people did when we did manage, after a lot of hard work for about 20 years, to get anti-Semitism on the anti-racist agenda in Canada and in the hate crimes legislation and all the rest, what happened? It was used as a political football, and we took steps back. That's the history you need to know, and we can do it together. But and it's not doing it the way it was, because it has to be updated. You need fancier, glitzier, TikToks and whatever, we've got to get with it, but not reinvent the wheel and not spin our wheels at each other because we're not being strategic and I'm not talking about the ones on the extreme. I'm not talking about, pardon the expression, people who are Jewish, who are in so the far right that they are advocating violence, and they are putting down, and they're homophobic, they're Islamophobic, they're racist, and they say it, and then they undermine the credibility. And then on the far left, in our own community, the anti-Zionism that aids and abets people who cross the line into anti-Semitism. Those aren't our audience. It's everybody else in the school boards who think that they want to be anti-racist and human rights, but they don't realize they're anti-Semitic. And it's not battering down the rams, with the battering rams, that's going to help them see that they're anti-Semitic. It's using really effective educational techniques. And then all of a sudden the penny drops and they realize, oh my God, I had no idea that's what I was saying, unless they really are anti-Semites. And then we call them on that and we get them fired. So, we need it all, and enough said.
Gerard, do you want to say something, and then perhaps a brief word from Sharon, then we're going to move to wrap up?
I just want to say thank you, Karen, for someone who's passionate about this and gets it. I don't think anyone could have said it better than you just did. We need that next meeting. We should set that next meeting. And exactly right. We need to listen to Lisa, we need to listen to other educators because they're the boots on the ground. They're the ones who are experiencing this on a daily basis. They're the ones who know the system. They're the ones who know what will affect change. It's for the rest of us to help develop the tactics to get to that point.
Shira?
Thank you, Karen. So I think that this might also fit in very much with what you were speaking about. And Gerard, I'm wondering if, on the other hand, the importance of our activism, but I think we also need to change the narrative of not only portraying ourselves as victims and maybe showing, I don't know if anybody else heard Dara Horn, the author of People Hate Dead Jews, but she said that there's something about us imbuing Jewish pride and teaching the world about all the things that we've done to contribute to society. We've been around for forever and no one knows. Kids were saying no one knows who Jews are. They don't know what we've done. And if that couldn't be part of our activism moving forward, making sure that the schools really do honor Jewish heritage when they're talking about all the prides, and that we really put forth facts about what Jews have done for society. I think that it would be an important change of narrative in addition to the activism.
But I think education always goes hand in hand with activism, and that's the important thing to highlight and to get that information out there. It's multi-pronged, it's multifaceted, and I think you're absolutely right about that. That's something that needs to be done.
I want to make sure everyone has who would like to speak has a chance to speak. But for anybody who needs to go, before we do that, I would like to really thank NJU Hatred and Lawfare and CAEF and OAA, which is the Facebook group, and I strongly suggest that you join Ottawa Against Anti-Semitism. That's my Facebook group, along with my colleague and dear friend and Jewish co-chair Jennifer Distanfano, who has just been an absolute just my rock, and there's no way we could have done this this past year and a half without one another. So I strongly suggest that you join that group and that you encourage everyone to join that group, because everything is updated on there. And I just like to thank again everybody, and also especially Arthur, who took the time to speak today about Ira and all his expertise. Thank you again to everyone, and to Gerard for speaking today. Very important. Really appreciate it. And to Anita and Michael and David, who are in the background doing all the technology. Thank you very, very much. So now we'll just, anyone who's able to stay on this call, we really appreciate it. And we'll let anybody who would like to speak ask questions. And I can help you with that, Anita, or you can call the names, whatever is easier for you.
Well, I'm good for a little bit. David Grunowski, there's a new voice we haven't heard from. Maybe you'd like to take a turn.
From B'nai B'rith. Hi, David.
Hey, how are you guys? Nice to be on the call. It's a very important discussion, and I'm very new to B'nai B'rith Canada. Just started a few weeks ago. I just wanted to let everybody know that B'nai B'rith Canada and the Métis Law Society, Canada's Hub for Jewish Legal Professionals, and law students have already been fighting anti-Semitism using the Canadian legal system. So I'm happy to say that we've done it with a great deal of success as well. And we have hundreds of legal experts across the country, and we'd love to formally engage with the Jewish community. Every organization should be doing something unique. So one of the cases we've been working on is suing the government of Canada to list the IRGC as a terrorist group. So that's just one example. In terms of anti-Semitism, we have some great resources. Just want to remind folks on the call that we have our 24-hour, 7 days a week anti-hate hotline and anti-hate mobile app. So these are two key resources to combat anti-Semitism and racism. And we also use this information for audit of anti-Semitic incidents. So if you have anything to report, please do so for the year of 2022 by December 31st. So that's all I just wanted to say. And Lisa, thank you so much for organizing this event.
It's funny that the top of the screen, you've got 3X, well, you've got one now B'nai B'rith and two longtime B'nai B'rithers. And I think we were very proud of the work that we did there. But as we've, and not really but as we've heard today, the answer is to use all our skills in the best way for the best interests of the community. And now I'm very proud to be, using my skills with CAEF, which is, by the way, developing some resources to bring the anti-Israel, anti-Zionist information into the curriculum. You'll hear more about that. And specifically working with Gerard and the End Jew Hatred movement to bring through the law and through advocacy to bring this concept of civil rights. So let's find a way to all work together, and welcome, David. I'm glad to meet you.
Yes, thanks very much for letting me talk again. I thought that since we have this audience together, I should put in a plug as well for what we're doing. On the 5th of December and on the 12th of December, we're holding two sessions at KBI, where I'm the chair of adult education. The first session is a text study where we're going to be looking at the definitions of anti-Semitism. We're going to take time to look at the words and try to understand the intent behind them, and both in the definitions and in the examples. And in the second session, we're going to try to address more directly the controversy around the IRA definition, with the goal of trying to understand each other as Jews and to understand the controversy and why is there more than one definition? What are the other people putting forward other definitions trying to accomplish, and what can we understand about that and about each other? I'm happy to say that Arthur has agreed to participate in the second session on the 12th. So anyway, I encourage all of you to sign up. We'd love to have a big turnout and deepen our understanding and knowledge of definitions of anti-Semitism.
I really appreciate all these organizations, knowing that the Jewish problem is not, first of all, it's not one for Jews to solve alone. It has to be done with everyone, of course, the problem of anti-Semitism, but also that it's not by city, it's not by country, this is our world, and we need to all come together. So thank you again very much.